Please join me in welcoming Professor Neil Garg.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. And I wonder if we could get the lights down just a little bit so you can see some of the slides. But yeah, how's everybody doing? This is amazing to see such a great turnout. You know, we're living in complicated times, and certainly if you didn't hear at UCLA, we're living in even more complicated times with the suspension of our federal grants a few weeks ago. Hey, Dan. It's great to see familiar faces. But it's really been quite complicated, but it is really nice to be here. The Talented 12 program, I think, has had a remarkable journey. I guess it's the 10-year anniversary since this program started, and it's certainly been something that has really become a flagship program for CNE News. And so it's really a pleasure to be here. The other thing I wanted to do was to, whoops, I think I'm gonna skip through your intro slides. Bam, okay, cool, here we go, here are my slides. But yeah, I wanted to start by just congratulating the Talented 12 class. So this class is remarkable. If you hadn't had a chance to read all their bios, you should. This is an incredibly talented group of people, as the name suggests, and they're certainly very driven and accomplished. So let's go ahead and give it up to all of this year's T12ers. Okay. Selected from a group of over, I think, 500 nominees this year through a very rigorous process, and so it's no small feat. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Tejas Shah over here. He's speaking next. He was a graduate from my lab, so congratulations to you, Tejas. It's really a well-deserved honor. I'm so happy to see how well you've done throughout your career. Of course, hopefully slightly influenced from your time at UCLA with us. All right, for today, I was asked to talk a little bit about my career, maybe try to share some advice that may or may not be useful. I'll try my best. But the talk is really going to focus on opportunities and how to think about different opportunities that have come our way at UCLA and how to make the most of them. And to get into that, I did want to tell you just briefly about my bio and where I came from. I'm a synthetic organic chemist, so the only way we can do this is in a proper retrosynthetic fashion. And so like all of you, thank you. Appreciate that. Like all of you, I wear a lot of hats, and I've just highlighted a few of these, right? So the day job is to be a chemistry professor, and there's a lot that comes with that. Of course, being a teacher, a researcher, a mentor, and performing service. Sometimes that service becomes extreme in the form of administration, like being a department chair or a vice chair. I've also been faculty in residence for 9 years, living in the UCLA dormitory with the undergraduate students. And as I'll mention, also co-founded a startup company, and that's just to name a few of the different things that I've been up to. And I started UCLA in 2007. Before that, I was at Irvine and Caltech for my postdoc and graduate studies, respectively. And then everything before that traces back to the great state of New York. I was at NYU as an undergraduate student, and before that, I grew up in a town called Fishkill in New York. Has anybody ever heard of Fishkill? Thank you. I feel like I should give you guys a round of applause. Hopefully you've never gone back. Okay, good. It's a really small town, and I'll come back to Fishkill in just a second. I did want to highlight the other job. This is really meant to be a career talk, but I think it would be an enormous oversight if I didn't share with you what I think my most important job is, and that's to be a husband and a parent. So that's my wife, Lindsay, and our 4 beautiful children. And suffice to say, I still haven't figured out work-life balance. If you figure out the solution to this, please let me know. I'm all ears, but certainly family matters, and on top of everything else that we do, I think it's always important to acknowledge that and appreciate that. Okay, so the things that we're going to talk about today are how I got into chemistry, that I'll keep that really brief, and then we're just going to talk about a couple of things from UCLA. I'll talk about organic chemistry for kids as well as some of the research we do. And again, this talk is all just about opportunities and how to make the most of those opportunities. So I'm going to embarrass myself by showing you an old picture of me back in the day. Thank you. No, that's in Fishkill, kids played soccer. So I played soccer growing up in Fishkill. You can see where it is on the map. It's just a little bit north of New York City, population a little over 20,000. And it turns out as I got into high school, I did fine in my coursework, especially in the sciences, but I wouldn't say I was really academically applied. I did okay, but certainly not the valedictorian or anything like that. It turns out in Fishkill, for me at least, there wasn't a lot to do. And I had a really great group of actually very smart friends who found interesting ways to get ourselves into trouble. And in order to do that, you needed money. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that I did to keep busy in my junior and senior year of high school. So the first one is I became a door-to-door knife salesman. So I sold Cutco knives. This is not, none of this is, I know you guys are laughing at my life, but this is all true. and I do welcome you to do that. But I sold Cutco knives. I was a door-to-door knife salesman for a relatively brief stint. I then did the dog census for the town of East Fishkill, so I went door-to-door with friends, asking people how many dogs they had and if the dogs were properly licensed. For each dog we found, we were paid 75 cents. And yes, we walked uphill both ways back in the good old days. And then the last thing is I got a job at Blockbuster Video, and for you many youngins in the audience, if you've never seen one of these babies, this is a VHS tape that predated DVDs, Blu-rays, and all the streaming services we use today. So I will say I was not spending my time on academics. I was doing things like this, but I learned a lot about communication and presentations and interacting with people. Okay, at some point though, I had to apply to college, and I was looking at different schools, actually looking mostly to move away from New York. But as I said, I like to do other things other than academics. And it turned out this band REM was playing in Madison Square Garden. And if you have a chance to go to a show at Madison Square Garden and you're a kid in the 90s in Fishkill, you go. And so a friend and I wanted to go to see REM, and his parents said, you can go, but you have to go check out a college on the trip. So we went down early, we went to NYU, and New York City just fit in really well for me. So it turns out I got in, I went there as a pre-med student, not for any reason except that my parents basically strongly suggested that be the path for me. We'll leave it at that. But I had a really nice blessing, and that's that I took an orientation exam that allowed me in turn to take honors general chemistry. So this is back in 96. And after a couple weeks, that midterm was coming up, the first exam, and all of a sudden I started to get terrified, and I felt like I was pretty in over my head. I went to see the dean, and I said, I think I need to drop from the honors into regular chemistry. And he said, that's fine, but you don't really have anything to lose if you just take that first midterm. Take the first midterm, see how you do. So I said, okay, I went back, I studied a little bit. I didn't overstudy, I didn't try to study everything that was out there, and I went into the exam with no stress. And that turned out to be incredibly important because I got one of the highest grades in the class. I then engaged in the coursework. I got to know Professor Walters, and I joined his research lab. And ultimately, in addition to getting into the coursework and doing the research, I also started to TA as early as my sophomore year in college. So it was a pretty exciting time, and what really brought everything together was when I took organic chemistry with Professor Rhodes. This was really about problem solving. I'd never seen a subject like this that didn't have so much math and so much memorization, and this is really what clicked with me. A little bit of a side note is that Professor Rhodes lived in the dorms. He lived in Brittany Hall. He was known for interacting with students and hosting them. That was very influential to me. I became a resident assistant, and then ultimately years later at UCLA, I did the same thing living in the dorms for many, many years. So this was a really special time, and then if you fast forward, I ultimately made it to UCLA as an assistant professor in 2007. Along the way, I was at Caltech and Irvine, as I mentioned, and just want to give a shout out to Brian, my PhD advisor, Larry, my postdoc advisor, and Ken, who's been my mentor, close friend, collaborator, and colleague at UCLA since I started. This would be a couple of other talks in itself to go through these, so I'm going to leave you without the remarks on graduate school, but certainly I learned a lot during that time. But let's go ahead and fast forward, and let's talk about some of the things that have happened at UCLA. So first and foremost, we established a research group, and I'm happy to say I have a remarkable group of students, and I have since I started there at UCLA. And I share with you some of the statistics. This is really to give credit to the group members because I'm happy to steer the ship, but it's really the community that the students and the postdocs build that ultimately allows for students to graduate quickly, get jobs, and ultimately once students join, they stick around and they're able to graduate. So it's really been a special, special group that I've been very privileged to work with at UCLA. Some of you are here and you know what you've done to contribute to this. In addition, the other thing I think was really notable for me is that I had in my contract that I would not teach undergraduate students for 3 years, and that's because I had a special NIH grant at the time. And what happened was interesting. At some point, Ken Howe comes in and he says, Neil, there's an opening to teach Chem 14D, that's basically organic chemistry for pre-meds, and we think you should do this before you go through a pre-tenure evaluation. And I said, no problem, I was a pre-med student, I can handle this. But certainly I was told, watch out, these are going to be the grade-grubbing pre-med students by reputation. And I'll say I found nothing of the sort. I thought the students were absolutely awesome. And if you can have a group of 400 students come into class thinking it's going to suck, but ultimately leave, think it's one of their most favorite classes that they take in college, I personally just found that to be a very special thing. And so I wanted to share that sentiment with you. Okay, in terms of the rest of the talk, it really, again, comes down to talking about opportunities. And I can trace a simple philosophy back to a particular event. And this was the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Foundation Teacher Scholar Symposium, which was just about 11 years ago. And the lineup of speakers they had for this thing was unbelievable. But Professor Sanjay Sarma from MIT was one of them, and he was the director of digital learning at MIT at the time. You all know about edX, right? And the massive open online courses that were established around this time. He was intimately involved in that process. And remind you, this is about 11 years ago, so I'm going to share with you my memory of this, which may or may not be true. But my memory of this is him describing the process of deciding that it was going to be important to create these massive courses and create an education for the world. They decided that was important, but ultimately knew that everybody was busy. And if they didn't just commit in some capacity, they wouldn't necessarily get it done. And so sure enough, they left the meeting, they had a date, and with that date in mind, that's when they were going to launch these courses for the world. And I took this to heart, and it was really quite powerful, because I think at that time it really resonated with me. I felt like I was too busy, and I was constantly saying no, even to things that I thought were pretty exciting. And what I took away from that is, that's fine, accept that you're busy, but if you're really excited, really passionate about something, just go ahead and commit to it, and you will figure out how to get it done. And all these things I'm going to show you, I think, operate under that philosophy. And so this, if there's one take home for today, it's probably this message. So the first lesson that I would share with you comes from thinking about the reputation of organic chemistry. Thanks, Craig, for already mentioning this. You can look anywhere. It'll be listed as one of the hardest classes in college. Even from my alma mater, it was listed on the front page of the New York Times a few years ago. Students are failing organic chemistry. It's an old story, same problem that we've had for decades. We won't talk about who to blame for all this, but I will say there's only one group of people that actually care about fixing this problem, and that should be us. And we actually need to do a lot more with that, and I just view this as an opportunity. So especially following that, I'd say, inspirational lecture from 2014, we worked on a lot of educational projects that go well beyond the classroom. We have a lot of resources that are really built for undergrads taking organic chemistry, and these are online resources. We're developing virtual reality tools. We have a mentoring pledge system. This is in collaboration with Jen Heemstra. I'm sure many of you know Jen. And Craig also was kind enough to mention that we do a lot for organic chemistry for kids. And these resources we've developed, they are online. You can check them out. But certainly they've been used all over the world, and they've had a positive impact on a lot of people. For the sake of today, though, we're just going to talk a little bit about teaching organic chemistry to children. And I know this is a really bright crowd, and one thing that I would say is that just as much as we have our scholarship within the specific research we do in, say, synthetic organic chemistry, there's an enormous body of literature related to the importance of teaching and the impact that it can have on society. So if you're not familiar with some of these works, I'd encourage you to check them out. But one of the projects we did was a really simple one that we began in 2016. I have the 4 kids, as you saw earlier. This is little Kaylee, who was 4 years old at the time. By the way, this is her debut in chemical and engineering news. But what we had decided to do at the time was to create a coloring book to help people appreciate organic chemistry. And it was kind of an accidental discovery because Kaylee had developed a fear of chemicals at that time, gave me a little bit of an attitude upon me treating her with a hot dog for dinner. So ultimately, I challenged her a little bit on it, and it turns out Kaylee loved chemicals, especially sucrose, and she loved to color. So we came up with this coloring book, and so you can see on the left it says, if you can't see it, it says, what's the chemical that makes candy taste so yummy, and here it has sucrose. It tells you a little bit about, and there's this little mouse character named Cheesy the mouse that guides you through this adventure. So this turned out to be really exciting. We've given out easily many thousands, if not tens of thousands, copies of this book, especially in Los Angeles. The kids will color just about anything. May as well let them color a chemical compound. But in addition, it's really the parents that their response, I think, was really what was fascinating. Most people have no idea what organic chemistry is. And all of a sudden, you have parents looking at this saying, wow, okay, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, you mix and match them in different ways, and that changes what these molecules are and what they do. Most people have no idea, and again, our responsibility to address. So this was a really exciting thing that we did. We followed it up with a version that was specifically about medicines, right? Making sure it's clear that medicines are typically made by organic chemists. Some of the group members got pretty excited about making a version for adults, so shout out to Darcy. Evan, are you still here? Yeah, I'll mention Evan again in a moment. Evan's in the back there. You can see, Evan, this looks just like you, by the way. Come on, Evan. Tough crowd here, okay. And then this is an activity book. The activity book is actually free online for download. So what we've been thinking about recently is these are good, right? The books especially can be, they're available on Amazon for a few dollars, and that just permits worldwide access. We give them out, like I said, for free around Los Angeles. But recently we've been exploring the idea of can we make these more available in some capacity by taking advantage of things like TikTok and YouTube and make this stuff interesting and potentially applicable to younger people. So we're just starting on this as a pilot program where we're making organic chemistry animations based off the coloring book. And if it's okay, perhaps I can show you one of those today. So let's see if this technology works. Hope you like it.
Go to your room. Oh, don't cry. What's the final program? Organic chemistry.
So look, this is just a pilot, right? But the idea is that everybody knows that onions will make you cry. Most people don't know anything else beyond that. So just trying to introduce that and make organic chemistry maybe fun instead of boring and dreadful. So please look out, we're making more of these videos, but we're just taking chemicals from the book and trying to bring them to life through those animations. Whoops, there we go. And then Craig, you were kind enough to mention, thank you, that we've also been teaching organic chemistry to children. So we have this notion, why not try to, if it's really like a new language, why not teach it to children? So a few years ago, same thing, we committed months in advance to create an organic chemistry summer camp. We advertised it, people signed up, and then in the meantime, we figured out how to launch it. So this has been really cool. We've just finished our third year of this summer camp. You can't see it so well, but we're basically teaching kids how to draw structures, how to assign stereo centers, and yes, children 9 to 13 years old can do this, no problem. And so it's something to think about, and we're certainly invested in this camp. Okay, so that gives you just a little bit of a snapshot of some of the stuff we do in terms of education, and I want to spend the last few minutes just talking about research. So one of the areas that we work in is in the chemistry of unusual strained intermediates, and again, a shout out to Professor Hauk. When I started my career, we were interested in aromatic versions of indoles called indolines. We then looked at non-aromatic strained intermediates like these, and more recently, we've been asking what opportunities are there if you really push the limits of strained intermediate chemistry. And what we decided to pursue were these structures called anti-Brett olefins. I'll call them ABOs. If you are unfamiliar with this, there's something called Brett's rule. And what it basically says, if you have bicyclic systems like this, it's okay if you have the double bond in this position, but if instead the double bond's at the bridgehead position, these types of things are considered forbidden. Brett's rule was codified way back in 1924, so at the time we were approaching the 100-year anniversary of this rule. And sure enough, there are scattered examples where people were able to break Brett's rule, but I would offer that a general synthetic solution to addressing how do you make anti-Brett olefins and how do you use them for synthesis. This hadn't been done. And so we really saw that as the opportunity. So the way we wanted to do this, ideally, is take advantage of something called Kobayashi chemistry. So you make a precursor like this with a silicon and a good leaving group. You treat it with fluoride. The fluoride attacks the silicon to make the 8 complex. This then eliminates, in principle, to make the anti-Brett olefin. And thermodynamically, even though you're making this unusual strained intermediate, it's facilitated by the loss of a strong leaving group and by the formation of a very strong silicon fluoride bond in the byproduct. And it turns out this looks great on paper, but you have this question of how do you make something like this? So I give a lot of credit to Andrew Callaghan, who at the end of his PhD, instead of hitting the beach, he spent the last few weeks banging out a synthesis of a precursor. His first generation route took about, I'd say, on the order of 15 steps, and the goal was just to validate the chemistry, which he did. We were then able to optimize it, and what we ultimately found is that sure enough, you can treat these compounds with fluoride sources in the presence of traps. In this case, just think of the anthracene as a Diels-Alder-Dyene that traps the antibred olefin generated in situ to give this types of product. And we demonstrated this for many other antibred olefin precursors as well as different traps. So this was really an exciting study that allowed us to address Brett's rule very conveniently 100 years after the codification of that rule. It also reached the younger generation, which was pretty cool. It reminded us to be skeptical of rules and hopefully gave back a lot of students missing points on exams over the decades from before. So this was a really cool study, but again, it came from recognizing that there could potentially be an opportunity, although challenging, the opportunity was there. And so again, lots of credit to the team who did this research. And then the last one is one that I think maybe is less familiar to many of you, and that has to do with the problem of how do you detect THC, the primary psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. And just to give you some context, give you a timeline, it was late 2016 where marijuana became legalized in California and Colorado. A little bit less than a year later, I was at a UCLA event, and somebody had asked, I had explained the chemistry of an alcohol breathalyzer, and somebody asked, why can't you do that for marijuana? And it turns out to be a pretty challenging problem. What I did at that time is I emailed everybody in the lab, and I said, is anybody interested in working on this incredibly, I think, societally important project? And the one person who really jumped at this was again, Evan Darsey. So Evan, I think, immediately saw the opportunity, but we didn't even really know where to start. We eventually came up with what we thought were some pretty cool chemistry ideas, but we hit a snag, and that's that even though in California it was legal federally, handling THC in a lab was still illegal. So that meant we had to do all the paperwork to get a DEA license, which took us almost a year. And so I'd say, again, huge opportunity, but you have to pay the price and be committed to the cause and just get it done, which is exactly what Evan did. And at the time, I'll just hint that electricin had just been popularized by Ica and especially by Phil Barron, and those were, I think, very influential for us. And so what Evan ultimately figured out very quickly once he got the DEA license in place is that the phenol and THC could be oxidized either chemically or electrochemically to give the corresponding quinone. And long story short, that's really the foundational steps to develop a breathalyzer. And so I'm incredibly proud of Evan. In addition to doing this, he worked on a lot of other projects at UCLA, but ultimately co-founded with me Electrotect. And for this, he's being recognized tomorrow with the Early Career Investigator Award. And so please check that out tomorrow at 3:20 in room 145A. And yeah, Evan's pretty exciting stuff, so please do check that out. And then I'll also just say that in addition to all these educational things, there's many other service opportunities and partnerships along the way. Again, I won't go through all of these things, but these kind of go beyond the usual call of duty. I'll say one of the most unusual things is serving the Department of Defense through the Defense Science Study Group. We also work with improving K through 12 education in California, collaborating in the local schools. And then my friend Dan Caspi, I wanted to highlight, old friend from graduate school. He does all the IT work behind all of our projects, and without him, many of these things that I've shown you and I didn't show you today wouldn't be possible. So it's really a really special treat to be able to collaborate with all these folks. Okay, in terms of closing thoughts for you, I do want to return to talk about this idea of opportunities, and you're probably looking at this list of stuff that I just showed you and saying, well, that dude's probably pretty lucky, and I'd certainly say I feel like I've been very lucky, knock on wood, hope that continues, and certainly being lucky helps. But the take home I want to leave for you, especially for the T12ers and a lot of other bright people here in the audience, is that when we think about opportunities, they're really just about choices. And one of the pieces of advice I got early on that I really liked was to just say no, right? And I started to say no more. But I think when I heard this advice in 2014, it reminded me that we do have choices. It's not just about saying no. It's about reflecting on whether or not something's important to you and how important is it. Are you passionate about it? Is it something fun? Is it something that could help society? If it is, if the answer to these questions are yes, don't say no. Just go for it, and you are smart enough and you are ambitious enough that you'll be able to figure it out. So that philosophy I think has been very important, and I just wanted to encourage you to maintain that. Of course, surround yourself with the right people along the way, and you have to learn and adapt and certainly try to be fearless in that process. The other part of the title that I gave you was to enjoy the ride. And I'll be the first one to say that I don't know that I figured out how to do this. Anybody ever get like what should be really good news and you just feel a sense of relief rather than excitement? You're like, whew, glad that worked out. So when I say enjoy the ride, it's to be able to be at a point where you can just appreciate awesomeness, some good news, and really just enjoy that. I think the only thing I know is that being able to take care of yourself is one of the most important parts of that, as my friend Ice Cube told me some years ago. And with that, and that's a true story, and with that, I think it can be tough, especially in challenging times, to be a leader. It can actually be kind of scary. But I'll say, especially to the T12ers, you are leaders, and especially with this recognition you're receiving, I just want to urge you to embrace your role as a leader, okay? And then also, if you're being a T12 recipient, you're also an optimistic person. And I just want to share that we really, really need that. We need you to share your optimism with other people, okay? And so with that, I'm going to close just by, again, congratulating the T12 2025 class. I thank you for your attention. If there's time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.